I received a letter from my childhood friend, Roderick Usher, his words filled with desperation, pleading for me to come to his ancient family home, the House of Usher. I travelled all day on horseback, and as soon as the shadowy outline of the house rose in the distance, I was seized by a deep, foreboding dread. Everything about that place exuded terror. The twisted, barren trees, the dark, stagnant pool reflecting the house and its gloomy landscape. I felt as if the air itself was dense with a suffocating miasma, heavy and oppressive, unlike anything I'd ever breathed. It was as though the house itself was shrouded in a sinister aura, a darkness that seemed to leach from every stone. The stones, though worn by time, appeared remarkably intact, as if held together by some sinister force. But my eye caught a faint crack, barely visible yet unmistakable, trailing from the roof in a jagged line down the facade, only to disappear into the black waters of the pool below. My chest tightened as I dismounted, feeling that somehow this crack was alive, a vein of rot spreading through the very heart of the house. A servant led me to Roderick, who lay motionless on a couch in a dim, shadow-filled room. When he saw me, he rose with a warmth that clashed with his appearance, gaunt, ghostly, with a pallor that looked almost translucent in the dim light. His eyes were fever-bright, and his unkempt hair floated about his head, adding to his spectral appearance. In that moment, I barely recognized him, feeling instead as though some ghastly spirit had taken the place of my friend. Throughout the evening, I felt my own mind teetering, as if his strange malady was somehow infecting me. He spoke of an overwhelming hypersensitivity that tormented him, of sounds that grated on his nerves, of light that stung his eyes like needles. And then he spoke of his sister, Lady Madeline, with an anxious tremor, as if her mere existence cast a shadow he could not escape. I barely saw her, just a fleeting, ghostly figure who drifted through a dark corner of the room, seeming almost to dissolve into the darkness. That night, Roderick confided in me that he feared he'd never see her alive again. His words haunted me over the following days, and I tried to distract him with books, music, anything to lighten the suffocating gloom. But his despair seemed to seep into every corner of the house like an invisible fog, creeping up walls and settling in my very bones. I felt as if I was slowly being drawn into his dread, succumbing to some dark enchantment cast by the house itself. Then, one evening, Roderick came to me with news that filled my soul with terror. Lady Madeline was dead. He asked me to help him lay her to rest in the family vault rather than the exposed cemetery. I agreed, though every step toward that vault felt like stepping deeper into some infernal abyss. The chamber was dank, shadowed, lying directly beneath my own quarters, as though the very foundations of the house were steeped in death. As we laid her in her coffin, I noticed how terribly alike her face was to Roderick's, and an uneasy suspicion clawed at me. Days passed, and Roderick's mind grew more unsettled, his gaze haunted, his steps frantic as he roamed the house. Shadows seemed to cling to him, and more than once I found myself questioning my own senses, feeling as if the house itself was alive, its walls whispering secrets too dark to bear. An oppressive dread took root in my mind, a feeling that some terrible truth lay buried beneath Roderick's silence. On the seventh night, unable to sleep, I paced my room, every shadow magnified by the storm raging outside. Suddenly, Roderick burst in, his face wild with terror. He flung open the window, pointing to the churning storm, his eyes feverish. I pulled him back, and in a desperate attempt to calm him, began reading aloud from a book at hand. But as I read, noises, impossibly timed to match the tale, echoed from the depths of the house, amplifying the terror in Roderick's gaze until I too felt as if the house itself was mocking us, that some dark force was stirring within its walls. And then he whispered it, a truth that froze my blood. He believed we had entombed his sister alive. He had sensed her struggling, her fury, trapped beneath the weight of her shroud, reaching for freedom. I could hardly breathe as he spoke, feeling her rage, her desperation seep from the very stones around us. And then the door burst open. There she stood, Lady Madeline, wrapped in her blood-stained burial shroud, her face contorted with an expression that could only belong to someone who had escaped death itself. She staggered toward Roderick, her hand outstretched, and he collapsed, his body drained of life. I fled. I did not look back. The storm raged as I stumbled from the house, but before I reached the gate, I felt a force pull me to look back. The crack down the facade yawned wide, the red moon illuminating it like a wound. With a final deafening roar, the House of Usher crumbled into the black pool, the darkness swallowing it whole. If you liked our video, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what your biggest fear is.